Okay, the mental capacity, the physical health, whether Joe Biden has Parkinson's, all of this is coming out since the debate. Other big stories I want to go through. I have with me today Kimberley Strassel from the Wall Street Journal. Kim, thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, Stephen. It's great to be here again.
So, big stories coming out. You have a new newsletter and also a podcast that just launched. I'm going to make sure to put direct links down below so that people can follow you and stay up to date on what's going on with those. The first thing that I wanted to jump in, as someone who's worked with the Wall Street Journal for many, many years, you have a pulse on what's going on the left and on the right. What are your thoughts on President Biden saying that if Republicans are able to pass the SAVE Act, which would block illegal immigrants from voting in our federal elections, that he would veto that? Doesn't that invite scrutiny that he's bringing tens of millions of illegals into the country just so that they'll vote him back into office?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing that I don't understand about Biden's position and Democrats' position on this. So their argument is we don't need to pass this law because it's already illegal to vote in a federal election if you're not a citizen. So this is overkill. You're just messaging. But the Republican point, I think, is very, very valid, which is that you can have that prohibition, but we now know from all the stories that there are some very lax registration requirements in some of the states. Some of them do not have the due diligence that others do. And why does that matter? I mean, if you've got a vote where there's 30,000 vote difference between two candidates, big deal. But we've had members of Congress that have been elected on a 6-vote margin, 100-vote margin. And we're also looking at a Congress, by the way, where the majority status has at times hinged on one member. You know, that's been all the more latitude that the speaker has had. So I think it's really important that. So I think what really matters here is what do they have? What's their problem against this? And it makes you wonder if the question therefore isn't, is their goal to open the pathway for more people to vote who really shouldn't be voting in elections?
Yeah. You're in the news. It seems that the mainstream media is shifting against Biden, like CNN, MSNBC. These guys have bent over backwards to have this PR machine propping up the president. He's the most brilliant debater. He's so sharp with foreign dignitaries. His foreign policy is second to none. Now we see the debate. A lot of Democrats saw him for the first time. And now leadership and voters are saying, oh my gosh, what's going on? Now this Parkinson's doctor story has dropped. Nobody knows what to make of that. Does President Biden have a PR issue around his health and his ability to manage the country?
Well, he definitely has a PR issue, and he has it mostly because the media right now is covering its backside. Let's make that clear. Okay, if they could still be covering for Biden, they would do that, but as they've done for the past 3.5 years. But the debate made that untenable, and because they didn't want to further embarrass themselves, they're now actually doing the sort of reporting they should have been doing prior to his ever getting into the White House about his capacity. And the White House is learning what it's like, what Republicans feel all the time, to run without PR cover. Okay, it makes it a much harder lift. Here's the thing, though, Stephen, it doesn't matter to them right now because the Biden White House has been very smart about this, and I do give them credit. Once they came out of that debate, the first thing they did is Biden said, "I'm not going to blink. I'm not going anywhere. You can't make me go anywhere." That made Democrats nervous about a standoff. But in the meantime, here's what he's done that's equally smart. He's been calling all the higher ups. And you and I both know, you work in Washington, the Democratic Party works different than grassroots Republicans. Democratic Party, whatever the party bosses say, almost everyone falls in line. So he worked very hard. He's been getting all those folks in line. He's got Hakeem Jeffries, he's got Chuck Schumer, he's got party elders, he's got the Congressional Black Caucus, the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, he's got progressive leaders like AOC and Bernie Sanders. And so long as those guys are united that they're behind him, I doubt very much you're going to see mass defections in the party. And that has allowed the White House to, for the moment, largely ignore the editorial boards and the talking heads that have been increasingly critical of him and this White House's lack of transparency about his health.
Yeah, I agree. It's like they tried to hold back the water, being the dam for Biden as long as they could, but once it broke. But and I don't mean to compare Biden to the animal kingdom. I want to be respectful of the office of president, but within the animal kingdom, you have like the alpha male, right? Mm-hmm. And if they lose that alpha status, then they get challenged big time. And what I see him doing that you correctly pointed out is he's now going around to the second layer saying, I'm still the alpha, get behind me. And he's trying to bring that back in. But then you have Hollywood, which has done a very good job of getting Democrat presidents into office. And George Clooney, Michael Douglas, others, they came out this morning after helping him raise tens of millions of dollars. And they're saying, dude, it is time to bow down, to back out and let somebody else in. Do you think Hollywood is going to turn on Biden?
Well, Hollywood is turning on Biden, and donors are turning on Biden too. We've had this Demcot, as it were, some of these donors saying, we're not going to give you any more money so long as Biden is your projected nominee. Here's the thing. Look, you and I probably think that for the country's sake, Joe Biden ought to be giving serious thought about his ability to continue leading. I think that there are a lot of people in Hollywood and Democratic rank and file that are looking at this and they see the incredible mountain Biden is now going to have to climb to win this race. I mean, it's getting to the point where I think it could be unachievable, right? The difference between those Hollywood guys and then those leaders that he has managed to keep focused around him is Biden is making the argument. And these are guys that are practiced in politics. They understand the wisdom of what he's saying. There's a truth to it, which is that if he gets out, things are going to be very, very messy. And there is no guarantee that they end up in a better position. So that's the calculation that the politicians are making, right? I mean, just walk yourself through what it looks like. He decides he's going to withdraw. Then you've got Kamala Harris. Nobody wants her. She does even worse than he does. But how do you step over the first African-American, female vice president to install a white guy like Gavin Newsom from California without blowing up the party? I think that they are very aware of the potential for this thing to explode in a way that's even worse than it is now. So I agree, Hollywood turning on them, donors turning on them, the media turning on them. But I just go back to this point that he will remain there so long as the party leadership is behind him. And I don't see that changing just right now.
Okay. Would you estimate that maybe public facing, he's telling them, I can get through 4 more years. I would be a much better option than Donald Trump. We don't want to go backwards for women. We don't want to go backwards on this war. But then privately, he's saying, we just have to get me to November, and then we can make decisions once we win. Any of that happening possibly?
It's possible. Although the risk of that, I mean, could that be happening at the most senior level private conversations? Yes, possibly. But that cannot be something that he's broadcasting to rank and file Democrats in letters or meetings or these Zoom meetings he's having, because any suggestion to them that he actually is too frail, too incapable at this point of doing another 4 years is a sign of that weakness that you were talking about and will cause more people to vote. Here's what Joe Biden cannot withstand. If his party in a unified fashion, including some of those top leaders, come out and say, you must go, he can't withstand that. he'll have to. I mean, he can argue, I have the delegates, they can't go anywhere. But that would just be a pressure too much even for him to bear. That's what he's scared of. And it's why he doesn't want committee heads coming out. So far, not a single senator has. If you start getting any bigger voices, that's when this calculation potentially changes.
Okay. Let me hit the flip side of this. James Carville, the Democrat election specialist that got Bill Clinton elected, he's been very vocal that Biden needs to step to the side. He said yesterday that he believes just before the Chicago convention that Biden will step down in a way that blocks Kamala Harris from coming into office, that she would have to become president on her own merits, which he says she doesn't have, instead of being anointed by Biden. But then he puts forward that there could be somebody like Michelle Obama or Hillary Clinton in the wings. He's kind of saying that he believes that there's backdoor conversations happening with the Obamas and the Clintons, who, in the past have been the big ones to overcome with any Democrat decision. What are your thoughts on his comments?
Well, are there conversations like that going on among people? I do not doubt it whatsoever. Whether or not Joe Biden is part of that conversation is less clear. I do think that there is a big conversation going on behind the scenes at the senior level about what do you do with a problem like Kamala? But this is the problem. And I think what people are, when they're gaming this out, they're all ending up at the back of the same conclusion. Pay close attention. Last week, when James Clyburn, who obviously is very significant in the Democratic Party, one of the more senior African-American members, he's a prominent member of the Congressional Black Caucus. They so far have been very supportive of Joe Biden. But when he was initially asked about the debate performance, the first thing he said was, well, Joe will have to make his own decision, but I'm backing Kamala Harris. That was a very clear signal. Well, meaning if he gets out, I am backing Kamala Harris. Okay. That's what he said. But that was a very clear signal. It was a warning to everyone in the party. Do not think you get to step past Kamala Harris if Joe Biden goes. She is going to have the backing of some of the most prominent identity movement features within the party. And there is going to be hell to pay if anyone suggests that she's not next in line. So I have no doubt those conversations are going on. Maybe someone could do a slipperoo in the kind of final days as the convention goes on that would make her ability to claim the nomination if Joe got out harder. But that would not spare the party from a big blow up if that's what happened.
Okay, so let me, for example, if they said, okay, I'm Joe Biden, I'm going to stay in the race, but I'm going to drop Kamala Harris and pick up Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton beat Donald Trump in the popular vote. Hillary Clinton has all this experience. If something happens to me, God forbid, Hillary Clinton steps in. You're saying, Jim Clyburn is saying, no way. Any plan like that, you've got to push to the side because the Black Caucus is only going to support Joe Biden if Kamala Harris remains on the ticket?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that is definitely, he wasn't asked that question in particular. He was making a comment saying that if Joe Biden were to withdraw from the nomination, that Kamala Harris would have his backing. Okay. My point was that it seemed to be a signal to say, don't think that you get to skip over the next person in line. Now, Hillary Clinton, I think that would cause a lot of issues. There'd be some people that would love it. Some people really don't like her, though. I mean, she did lose that election to Donald Trump. Michelle Obama would be a very different calculation because you have another Black woman there. Although I still think that there would be a lot of, Kamala Harris, she's not well liked among average Americans, but she has a great deal of support among many activists in that party. So again, the mistake Democrats made here was Joe Biden saying that he was going to run in a primary in the first place. He should have backed out. And then the party could have legitimately waged a contest in which Kamala Harris was simply one of the people competing. She would have been challenged. There would have been no question, and she'd have lost. But now, since we're not going to have a competition because Joe Biden decided to do this, and now we're all talking about an open convention, anything that they do is going to look like someone's being installed from the top, and there'll be very bruised feelings and very unhappy internal civil warfare if Kamala Harris is not next in line.
Okay. Yeah, I completely agree. I think they would just absolutely be fighting each other. Going back to Biden's threat of vetoing the SAVE Act, does this come from the fact that they are very comfortable flooding the country with illegals, that they're very comfortable bankrupting our social safety net programs, hospitals, school systems? Is this whole thing about remaining in power and votes? I've seen people saying this is a way of, in the next generation, removing freedom-loving Americans with socialist-thinking newcomers. What are your thoughts on, flooding the country with illegals?
So I think that there's actually two things at play here. One, I actually do believe that there is a portion of the progressive movement that truly does just believe in open borders. And they believe that there is some sort of duty to give anyone asylum who wants asylum. Okay, that's the charitable view of some of those. I disagree with that. National sovereignty is very important, and we can't, as a nation, support a policy like that. It's completely nuts. But I do think, but much as I think that there are progressives who also truly believe that policemen are bad and you shouldn't have jails. Okay, that's also a nutty idea, but I think they truly believe that notion. All right. Is there separately a portion of very calculated people out there who see the potential for vote getting in this? Yes. And I think all you have to do is look at the nutty law that Washington, D.C. passed that said, hey, you don't have to be a citizen to vote in our elections, right? Do I have any doubt that if Democrats really were in total control, that they would try to change that provision in federal law about non-citizens voting? They might well try to do that. I think that there's an interesting question, though, about whether or not this calculation, how that plays for them in the longer term. One of the things that's been most fascinating to me as a political observer is I'm old enough to remember 20 years ago, Democrats saying they would have a permanent Democratic majority because of the number of Hispanics and African Americans and how they were growing in the country, and they're reliable Democratic voters. Not so much anymore. Certainly not among the Hispanic community. And we've seen some dramatic shifts in recent years. But also you're beginning to see some breakup in there in the African-American vote too. Certainly also in the Asian vote. There's a lot. And Donald Trump has been a very interesting force in all of that as well too. Does that matter in the near term? Is it more likely that if you had a flood of newly arrived immigrants, that they might vote more in favor of those who gave them, the access to the country? Possibly. But I'm not sure in the longer term that is an easy a calculation as some of the theories out there about this suggest.
Yeah. I don't know if you saw this or not, but Elon Musk, he retweeted somebody's theory that they aren't actually bringing illegals in so that they will hopefully vote for Biden or a Democrat, but so that they can pad the voter rolls and flood each community with more ballots than is necessary in a ballot harvesting scheme. Do you think there's any truth to Elon suggesting that?
Look, I think what we need to know and what we found from this last election is that if you remember, all of the hysteria and concern about what had happened with the vote largely transpired in courtrooms and across the country in terms of election officials after the votes were in or as they were coming in. And I think the lesson that a lot of people learned here is that there's a lot of mischief that can be done in the run-up to elections, whether it's Zuckerbucks and money going to election officials who then went out and potentially only use the get out the vote money in certain areas in terms of where you have drop boxes, where they're located in cities and the hours in terms of balloting, harvesting operations, even legal ones. And this is something, by the way, Republicans are now looking to use those states that have those laws to their advantage because it's on the books. And that you have to be savvy about the many, many clever ways that people are indeed engaging with or stretching the laws that we have for voting. So I think that that is something that the Republican National Committee, I just had on my new podcast, Michael Whatley this week, the RNC chair. It was a big discussion we had about how election integrity has to happen as much upfront before people go to vote as it does on the back end in looking to see what happened.
Yeah, that's a good point. I just had Representative Scott Perry on from Pennsylvania, and he said one of the things that we've learned is there's almost no remedy on the back end. All election integrity must be on
Right.
the front end. And I think he had a good point there. Speaking of your podcast, you had Whatley on. He gave no clue as to who Donald Trump was choosing for vice president. But during your interview, which I listened to, he did mention that there are more than 3 people being considered. Did that lead you to believe that maybe Trump hasn't selected somebody yet? Or do you think he has and they're kind of just playing these games to keep people engaged?
It's impossible to know that two things. I mean, look, it's Donald Trump, right? I mean, it's like literally, who knows? I mean, one of the things I'm sure you've probably heard this before is there used to be a little bit of a race when he was in the White House. Everybody would try to be the last person that spoke to him before he made a decision because he was always possible to change his mind. He would like at the very last minute might be like, oh, well, that sounds like a good idea. We'll go there. So people would like hide out in the corridor so that they could like sneak in after everybody else had gone. Sometimes he just changes his mind. It's also possible, by the way, Stephen, that he's made a choice and he'll change his mind again before everything happens. So the couple of things that Whatley said that were interesting. One, as I said, is it true that he'd actually narrowed it down to 3 candidates? And he said, well, there's no question. There's been a lot of talk about those 3 candidates, but there have been many, many conversations about other people too. So he kind of led it out there that not necessarily just down to J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio and Doug Burgum. But the other thing that was fascinating is he said he had no idea. Donald Trump had not told him. So he said, he swore on public, in the video that he had no idea who this was going to be. I think it's possible he hasn't made up his mind yet. I am sure that he probably does have a very firm short list in his head, but Donald Trump remember The Apprentice. He kind of likes to run people through their paces, sort of make them perform and see how they handle the stress. Not necessarily a bad test to do when you're asking someone to step up for the second most important job in the world and see how they do under fire and with a press grilling. So he could still be engaged in that hazing, as it were.
Okay. Of the 3 names that you mentioned, Doug Burgum, Senator Marco Rubio, Senator J.D. Vance, do you have a preference on one of those 3? And do you think it's one of those 3, or is it somebody outside of those 3?
So let me put this a little way. Instead of saying like, this is my favorite. One thing I keep trying to remind everybody is I think this decision is more important than your usual vice presidential decision. And that is because if Trump should win, he only has 4 years. The Republican Party has got a little bit of a tussle going on inside it for some of its ideological core. And so whoever gets named is going to be de facto. Look, we were just talking about Kamala Harris is going to be the de facto next in line. And their views are going to be very important in the future of the conservative movement. And with that in mind, I have to say, I do have some concerns with a couple of those that are on the short list, in particular, J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio, who very much have been at the vanguard of this populist movement in the party. And some of that, that's very Donald Trumpian, some of it, definitely on immigration, some of it on trade, some of it, I think, has been an overdue call for the party to think through some of those issues when they've been very static on them for a long time and they were not listening to a lot of their voters. But what worries me more is this sort of populism that veers toward Bernie Sanders socialism. People calling for industrial policy, government deciding how markets work, and also we need more handouts. We just need to give them to the people that we really like families, etc. Some corporations, evil, bad. We should raise corporate taxes. We should really muscle down on our anti-monopoly policies and take it to those business guys. Price controls on certain issues. A lot of that's been talked about, and it makes me concerned. I am a fervent Reagan Republican who believes the best government is the smallest one we can get, and I do not want government telling me how to run my business, or taking my tax dollars and recycling it to the causes that they think are best.
Yeah. I've been, as you said, gamifying this. I've been thinking through, like, okay, if I was Donald Trump, who would I pick? The person that keeps coming up is, Dr. Ben Carson. He's lovable, he's intelligent, he's articulate, he's got a calm strength about him. But then I think, okay, he's got the age thing that they're worried about with Trump and Biden. I look at like Byron Donalds of Florida, strong black male, family focused, could carry the MAGA energy for 4 to 8 years. I look at Marco Rubio. He could do, tremendous things with the Hispanic community, moving over to, the Republican conservative thinking. So anyway, at the end of the day, it will be Donald Trump's decision. But he's, like you said, he's left all of us guessing, which is something he likes to do.
I think so. For the record, I mean, if you're going to look for a candidate that's going to help the ticket, right, in some way in terms of voters, the key voting group I would be looking at would be those that the Republicans have been very weak in the last 2 cycles, and that is largely suburban women and more moderate voters. And that would argue, just to throw a couple more names out there that I think would be fantastic on the ticket, a Nikki Haley, a Kim Reynolds. She doesn't get talked about much. A Glenn Youngkin. All young, by the way, all vibrant, all with a lot of fire, but I think would be a great balance on the ticket and reassure a lot of people.
Yeah, that would be interesting. Okay,
I don't think that's going to happen, any of those folks.
Biden had this, in my opinion, disastrous debate. This morning, I went back and rewatched, and it was worse the second time because I actually had time to focus on each person versus whether CNN was being fair or not. Then Biden does this George Stephanopoulos interview, which also did not go well. And George Stephanopoulos was caught on camera yesterday saying Biden's toast. He does not have 4 more years in him. Now ABC is saying we're distancing ourselves from George's comments. But in that interview, George Stephanopoulos asked several times if Biden has done or would do a neurological or a mental competency test, to which Biden responded, "No one has told me I need to." What do you think is going on there? Are they going to keep him as far away from a psychological test as they can because it may actually prove something?
So this is now part of the big fight going on over the doctors in the White House too. And the press corps is really circling on this because, as you know, we've had this news, which the White House physician confirmed, that there has been, as part of Biden's physical, and he's had 3 of them since he's been in office, that specialists actually come in and they kind of check him out in all of their different areas. And that included this neurologist from Walter Reed, Kevin Kennard, who has been present at these 3 physicals. The big question that you put your finger on is, how rigorous was that neurological aspect of that physical? Was it someone just watching him walk across the room and say, well, you seem to be in control of yourself, tapping on his knee with a little hammer, or was it? And I think this is a question Stephanopoulos was asking, and that people really want to know, is it, many of us have had older relatives, they begin to slip. And when I do, you take them to a neurologist and they're given a series of actual cognitive tests. And these are directly designed to kind of gauge whether or not you have some kind of mental decline or something like Parkinson's, the beginning of dementia. That is the thing that I think the fact that the White House has not simply clarified this question and said, yes, he has, and he passed in flying colors, they won't say that. And Biden himself, you just noted, he said, no one's ever told me I had to have one. Also, he was asked again by Stephanopoulos, and he says, I have a cognitive test every day when I go to work. But that's not answering the question. That leads me to believe he has never been given one. And you have to ask the question, why? And I think the obvious answer is nobody wants to be put in a situation where they give it to him, he doesn't do well, and then they are asked about it, and they are faced with either covering it up and lying to everyone or being truthful.
Yeah. There was a saying that I believe it was my mother used to say was, you can keep your mouth quiet and people might think that you're intelligent, or you can open it and remove all doubt. And I think that's what's going on here is you can't find what you're not looking for, and you don't go searching for things that are going to be, problematic for you and your presidency, especially with, less than 120 days or however many days it is until the election. Kim, if people want to get on your newsletter or tune in to your podcast, you're going to have, access to some of the biggest guests out there. What is the best way for them to do that?
Oh, thanks. So the best way to do it is just to go to the Journal's website. Both of them are called All Things with Kim Strassel. The podcast comes out on Tuesdays. You can sign up and to subscribe to it, obviously, on wherever you listen to your podcasts. And then the newsletter, you can click on the link and hit the subscribe button to that too. And then it'll be sent to your email box every week if you want that as well.
Okay. I will put direct links to that down below. Thank you so much for coming on. I know how busy you are. We had months of back and forth to arrange this. This was a great interview. I really appreciate it. I hope you have a great rest of your day.